Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Karen Knox, a Toronto writer, director, and actor you might know from her work on the series Slo Pitch, Barbelle, or Homeschooled, among others. She's just directed her first feature, Adult Adoption, which stars Ellie Moon as a young woman whose determination to find a surrogate parent winds up making her life even messier than it already was. It opens in Toronto at the Review Cinema this Saturday, July 14th, and in London and Vancouver next week, and you should check it out. Karen picked The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, Peter Greenaway's 1989 stunner about four people, a perfectionist chef, a monstrous gangster, his unhappy spouse, and a reserved bookseller, played respectively by Richard Bohringer, Michael Gambon, Helen Mirren, and Alan Howard, whose lives intersect at a very fancy London restaurant with spectacularly tragic results. If you know, you know. And if you don't, welcome to the world of Peter Greenaway. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I love Peter Greenaway pretty unequivocally. And I think when I didn't go to film school. So my sort of introduction into cinema was via other people who were cinephiles. And I was living in London when I was 21. And this older person who I was briefly romantically involved with was you have to watch all of Peter Greenaway's oeuvre. Otherwise, you will never understand cinema. You will never be, a true auteur. So I was well, I guess I better start my education. Where should I start? And they told me, okay, yeah, you got to start with The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. It's actually really hard to just rail off the title of that film. You're okay, wait, yes, it's The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, not just Cook, Thief, Wife, Lover. So I started with that movie, and it was I remember watching it for the first time on my laptop in my disgusting flat in London, and hearing Michael Nyman's score for the first time and being oh, this is art. This is the thing that I want to make. This is true cinema at its most gesamt Kunstwerkian kind of quality. It's Wagnerian, it's theatrical, it's irony laden, but it's also so kind of embraces melodrama in a way that was very appealing to me as a 21-year-old. And of course, a huge part of Peter Greenaway's entire collection of films for me is his costumes. I'm obsessed with clothes. I always have been. I'm a real sartorial, I'm a clothes hound. And so, as soon as I was Googling, I was wow, my God, the costume design is so amazing on this. And I was okay, well, of course, Jean-Paul Gaultier designed all of the costumes for this film. And I just thought they were it was amazing. And I think too, prior to seeing Peter Greenaway's sort of collection of work, I was really into Before Sunset, Linklater stuff, very improvisational mumblecore, kind of gritty indie stuff. And I was this is really cool. But then seeing how sort of surrealism can be worked into cinema in a way, in this film. My favorite sort of one of the things that struck me right away is when we change rooms, the entire lighting palette changes, the entire color palette changes, and the wardrobe is just instantly different. And if there's no commentary made on it, it just exists in the world. And I was oh, you couldn't really do that in a mumblecore flick, could you? It just wouldn't quite work. So I think for me, it was sort of oh, wow, movies can be theatrical. Because I come from a theater background. So I love theater. And I, unfortunately, if left to my own devices, have a bit of a penchant for melodrama. So I found, I think when I watched Greenaway, I was yes, this is the kind of movie that I want to make. This is what I aspire to. And then I just went down such a rabbit hole, watched his entire collection of films, most of which I really liked. Some of which I thought were absolute dog shit. But most of them I really, really enjoyed.
I don't think I've met anyone who's loved everything Greenaway's done. They either the turn towards the midsection of his career, in the mid-90s after Prospero's books, when he embraced video and just got seriously weird
Yeah.
and decided to do whatever he wanted. But then you have things like the baby of I always want to call it, yeah, I always want to call it the baby of Macon because someone referred to it once as the maybe of bacon and it never left my head. Derisively. But
Yeah.
the people he got to work with him in those films or those movies and those projects still makes them interesting.
Yeah.
So I always go back and I almost always regret it.
Yeah.
But the earlier formal stuff, the films, yeah, right up to Cook the Thief, I think that was sort of his turning point, really, because it gave him the mainstream success or the reasonable art house success and the breakout that he'd never had before.
Yeah.
But things like Drowning by Numbers and The Draftsman's Contract.
Drowning by Numbers is actually my favorite Greenaway film. And I was going to pick it, but I was like, it wasn't like, it's definitely my favorite Greenaway, but it wasn't the one that like got me into Greenaway. Right. And and I actually remember more about Cook, Thief, Wife, Lover because it hit me so hard. But if I was being like an astute Greenaway academic, I'd be like, Drowning by Numbers is his best film. What is your favorite film by him?
I think I'm going to go with Cook the Thief.
Yeah. Cool.
Because it plays with my my own sensibility in a way that, it scratches me like an ASMR video. It's so pleasing to watch.
Oh my God.
All that perversity and all that beauty and the way that he constantly, I mean, right from the start, it's all about the intrusion of the vulgar into art, right? Like into the spaces that we consider elevated. And he's never on the side of the thief. Like Gambon's character, Albert Spica, is a monster.
Yeah.
But he is such a fun monster that we enjoy. It's almost like a template for The Sopranos 10 years later. Enjoy watching this awful person just destroy everything around him and condescend to the man who is to Bohringer, to the chef who is bringing him this magnificent food day after day, night after night, and not value anything. It's only about what things cost, and then have a different kind of vulgarity, which is on-screen sex. Portrayed as so sensitive and loving and kind. And then, as I got older, I realized all of these characters are over 40. Like most of them are approaching 50. Yeah. And you have the story of a genuine love affair between two people who ordinarily wouldn't be sexualized by cinema. And that's not interesting to Greenaway. Like that's just, he clearly doesn't care about their age, but and you've got the younger people who don't appreciate it right there in the movie. You've got Tim Roth's character as this naive, like this sort of nascent vulgarian, like he's going to be just as bad as Albert if he doesn't see something better to distract him. And Kieran Hines as someone who knows better and finally speaks up and is destroyed for it. And all of these things which we would recognize as kind of, and I keep trying to place it in time because this would have been 89. So this is 3 years after Neil Jordan's Mona Lisa, or maybe only 2 years. But it feels like Greenaway's answer to that. Like if that's what's selling right now, I'm going to make that kind of movie in my way.
Interesting.
And throw up the, flip the V's to this idea of what proper British art cinema is. Because this is right, like Prick Up Your Ears is happening. And Mike Leigh and Ken Loach haven't had their breakthroughs yet, but they're already revered. And he just whops this thing right into the middle of all of it and gets England to pay for it, right? Because it was financed publicly, or at least partially, and delivers this thing. I mean, I remember seeing the press screening at the Canada Square with 100 people tops.
Oh, wow.
Because I can't remember if it played TIFF or no. Oh, it did play TIFF on September 11th, 1989, as it turns out.
Whoa.
But I didn't see it there. I saw it after the fact because when I was, that was my first or second year covering the TIFF for the Stars video magazine. I didn't have access to the press screenings yet. And I saw it with radio contest winners, right? Who had no idea.
What was the audience response to that?
Silence, walkouts, anger. It was great.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's not an easy film to watch. Like you have to it's so like, that is the other thing that I love about the film. That is like, it's so beautiful, but it's also like completely disgusting. And it's like the mix of those two things is like, I don't know how Greenaway quite pulls it off because everything is so elegant. And like the food is beautiful, but it doesn't look delicious. And the sex is like aesthetically gorgeous. It's like, these two people making love in like a pantry or like surrounded by like beautiful things of cheese, but it's not sexy. And it's like, how does he do that? Like, it's like this very interesting thing where he takes these, like very like bodily sort of things. I mean, Greenaway is so obsessed with like viscera and like what is dirty and like the human sort of like what makes us like the most human. And he elevates it and he makes it so elegant, but there's like no warmth in it whatsoever. And it's kind of this like outside eye. And it's it's something I have never been able to do as a filmmaker. And I'm kind of like, how do I do that? How do you present that? It's a very interesting skill that I think probably has a lot to do with the fact that he is a painter and like comes from, a fine arts background. And he says too that he's like so not obsessed with narrative. He's like, I don't care about narrative. And I'm like, interesting. Is that how you do it? You just have to like be like, okay, I don't care about the story. I just want it to I want it to feel a certain way. I want it to look a certain way. I want it to sound a certain way.
Yeah, but he does care about the story. I mean, at least in this case, and in the films he made in the 80s, they all have very clear narrative lines. They're just presented in this strange, surrealistic, stylized way.
Yeah.
Like, this is a revenge picture. This is a story. This is so simply readable as
just
what
a
it
revenge
is.
Story.
It just happens to be, framed like a Renaissance painting and lit like an impressionist work. And I'm probably screwing up the reference points, but it's so clearly the work of someone who is interested in making a statement about the thing he's showing us. But it's cold without ever telling us that anybody, like, no one is right in the end. I mean, if you're looking at it, it's as sort of a palette of the 7 deadly sins. Like, there's gluttony, adultery. They're all in there.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
That's Caravaggio. That's what he would have done.
Yeah.
And this is his version. I think I'm terrible at the fine art references.
Right. Yeah.
But it is so clearly directed by like the hand of one person. And Sacha Vierny's cinematography is just as important.
Yes.
But it is Greenaway telling him what colors and what lights and what gels. Like, you can feel it.
And that's the other thing too, is like the color palette in it to me is so fascinating. Like, he chooses, it's, in the same way where it's like, he doesn't want anything ever to be like too, I don't know, like warm or like genuinely erotic or sexy. So he picks these, like, the palette is gorgeous. It's like these jewel tones of like emerald and ruby and sapphire and like sometimes a little bit of like citrine, but everything is like, it feels like imperial in a way that is like, there's always a little bit of like, you never feel comfortable when you're watching the film. Like, he doesn't allow you to ever feel comfortable. Like, even with like the like weird Greek chorus of like Dalmatians that he has like running around the parking lot of the Hollandaise. He loves Dalmatians. Dalmatians, like, they're all over Greenaway's movies. And
it's because they're inbred and insane. I think it's his commentary on the English.
Yeah, might be. I mean, it's interesting too, because this movie was made, I guess, Thatcher era.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm like, interesting. I'm like, are we just talking about like, is this his, I mean, he's like ahead of his time in a lot of ways. It's like, is this his Triangle of Sadness? Is this the menu? Is it just a massive commentary on like, on greed and our obsession with consuming and like, there was a talk that I listened to that he gave. I can't remember where it was, somewhere in LA, he was doing a talk, and he's talking about the character of Albert, Michael Gambon, who Michael Gambon plays. And he said he's the character who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And I was like, yes, Greenaway. I was like, that's what I'm talking about. I was like, this terrible, like, new money gangster who is just like obsessed with privilege and with poise, but has no appreciation for like anything that is truly artistic or has value. And I thought I was like, that really like cemented the sort of like, I don't know, ethos of sort of like what this film was trying to, what Greenaway was trying to say with this film. But have you seen the menu yet?
I have. I introduced the world premiere at TIFF, in fact, which was
I
kind of an
haven't,
amazing honor.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can imagine. I haven't seen it yet, and I'm really looking forward to watching it because I'm like, I love food movies. I love the entire cast of The Menu. And I was like, as I was rewatching this film to talk about it on this podcast, I was like, oh yeah, I was like, The Menu. I was like, I wonder if I'm sure that was there was a couple of stills on the mood board for The Menu from Greenaway's work.
You know, it's
Is
funny.
there
It didn't
is
come
there
up.
crossover? Okay,
I
interesting.
will say that it is like The Menu is a one joke movie, but it's a really good joke.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
just variations on that point for the entire film. And once it establishes what it's going to be, it really just goes for it.
Interesting.
But it is trying to be, I think it's what's interesting is that Mark Mylod's direction is stylized in pieces. So you're allowed to appreciate the production design of the restaurant, and you're allowed to appreciate the sort of the crispness of the white uniforms and all of that. But he really only indulges it in, there are these sort of hero shots of the food with little bits of recipe that show up for each course. And that's when it feels like he's going in that direction. But otherwise, it's sort of, it's played out from mostly Anya Taylor-Joy's character's perspective, and she's the normal person in the room. And so she's allowed to be repulsed by what she sees and horrified. And so are we. But it is fun. It's a ride. It's definitely worth seeing. We didn't get to talk about Greenaway there, though. It didn't come up. He was talking about other references. I mean, he directs Succession, so I think that's kind of the logical conclusion for this is that's what it's about. But Succession is this too. Like, Succession is about Speaker's kids.
Yes, totally.
And Brian Cox, who
is totally Michael Gambon, just many years later.
But he's become respectable, right? He didn't kill someone and get shot himself, and he's endured long enough to like launder his billions and become respectable. This guy, and I absolutely love this weird little thing about English cinema, which is the Harry Potter movies have become the gateway drug for all of these films. That all of these actors who worked with Lee and Greenaway and Loach, and they're all just turning up as kindly teachers in these movies.
I know.
Gambon gets to play Dumbledore, and there's like a whole bunch of 22-year-olds who are about to see this whenever it comes back.
I know.
Have their heads explode.
Because he is, and I think of all the performances in the film, I think Gambon is the best. I mean, it's so interesting because, you know, Greenaway does this kind of like strange thing where like, I don't even know how he's directing the actors, but I feel like he's kind of just like less emotion, just less. But Gambon, I feel like he just kind of let Gambon be a bull in a china shop. I feel like Gambon got very little direction in this movie and showed up on the day, and Greenaway was like, right, yes, good. Yep, keep doing it. Because like his monologues, like the first monologue in the movie when he's like smearing dog shit all over one of the workers at the restaurant. I'm not even sure like who that character is supposed to be. Somebody who owes him money.
Yeah, I thought it was like a business rival or something, but somebody who's definitely lower on the totem pole.
Yes. And it's like a 15-minute monologue. Like nobody speaks for like the first 15 minutes, except for Gambon, with like minor interjections from his cronies. But no one speaks except for Gambon for the first like 15 minutes. And he just goes. And it's so entertaining. It is like it, and it does reach a breaking point in the film, I think, when you're just like, you're tired of watching him be so cruel and like just destroy. And like, you can see, like, I love that. I love the progression of, I mean, it's so funny because like it starts on, I think, a Thursday and it ends on a Friday. It's like 8 days. The movie takes place over 8 days. And, you know, but I love seeing the progression of like how many people are coming to the restaurant because Gambon just like every night, it's like another disaster at the restaurant that he's causing. And he's like slowly kind of, you know, isolating himself in this hell of his own making. But it's like, it's his, but it's so funny because I was reading that Greenaway actually didn't want Gambon for Albert. He wanted Gambon to play the bookseller. He wanted him to play Michael, which I thought was so funny because I was like, oh yeah, there's the Dumbledore aspect of like Gambon. But I think Gambon kills this role. It's masterful. And the moments when he like totally turns and you see this like naked, childlike humanity in him when he talks about wanting to have children and how much he loves Georgina. You have sympathy for him. You're like, this man is a fucking monster, but like he is sympathetic in like a kind of way, because he's such a clown, and he's such a clown and such a bully, but there is like a tender little part of him that is like just desperately wants to have children. And I love the performance so much. I think it's like up there for me and like performances of all time.
Oh, it's his Raging Bull. It's
Totally.
Absolutely magnetic and horrifying and all of those things. And I think the reason we need to spend 15 minutes with him is we need to understand why Georgina wants out. Like By the time those scenes are over, by the time we actually get to hear her and see her as anything other than arm candy who's just beautifully dressed but suffering silently next to this monster, then we're on her side so completely. Yeah. And his tenderness, which is, you're right, it's there. And I think that's Gambon more than the script, because there's probably a way that was supposed to be played as feel sorry for me. Yeah. As not vulnerability, but just an
manipulation.
An attempt to cull sympathy from people. He gives it a heart that just, this is a broken man. He never had a chance as a child, and he grew up into this. He saw a way to become successful, and he took it, and it cost him everything. Yeah. But to pivot then to the wife, the lover, to all the other things that are happening around him to which he's oblivious, is great, because then all you're waiting for is for him to find out, because that's going to happen. And the structure of the film guarantees it. But this is a 40s noir in a weird way. It's just,
it totally does have noirish elements to it. It is quite noirish.
Yeah. Betrayal, revenge. Yeah. Forbidden everything.
Yeah.
Retribution.
He creates like such, like, it is like, it's anxiety. Like it's just so much anxiety. Like in the first scene in the bathroom, when Helen Mirren is like blowing the bookseller in the bathroom, and Gambon comes in, and you're just like you really are terrified that they're going to be discovered, because like, I think that speaks to the quality of Gambon's performance, because you are terrified as a viewer as to what this man will do, because you know that he will do whatever he wants. And like when he finally does discover that Georgina is cheating on him, and he's like screaming in the kitchen, "I'll kill him and I'll eat him. I will eat him." Yeah. Like, you know, that's what's going to happen. You know, that's what's going to happen in the movie. And then the turn of it is so good. My favorite part of the movie, for sure, which was like the moment when, like, I remember, like, I had like full body chills when I watched it when I was like a 21-year-old, is the moment when like Nyman's score comes in, and the entire kitchen staff comes walking out the doors with like the pallbearers with like Michael's corpse, like human à l'orange. And like, you have like the scullery boy and like the whore who, like, Albert's like stuck a fork into her face, and she's coming back with this like weird, like half face mask on. And that's when like Nyman's score, I think, just like, it is so seductive and like powerful. And it's like French Revolution and like all of these ideas that have kind of been, you know, circling, or that have been like kind of, like tornadoing around in this world, kind of like become still and focused and centered. And it's just like pure revenge fantasy. And you're like, yes, you're like, make him eat that corpse.
Yeah. It's not a climax. It's a crescendo.
It's a crescendo. Exactly. And it's so Wagnerian, like it is. And then it's amazing too. Like, I'm obsessed with Michael Nyman, like my favorite film composer by like a million miles. And like, I've listened to the soundtrack a number of times, and rewatching the movie, I'd forgotten that weird sort of like dissonant, I think it's like clarinet and trombone that comes in at the end that sort of creates that like, wow, wow, wow sound, is only in like the final 2 minutes of the film. And like, cause you have like, everybody knows the sort of like opening,
strings,
the opening note, the string section that's like, dun, 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 dun.
I mean, which is the reason for the anxiety too, because it's a heartbeat, right? Like it's just constantly agitating at us. But sorry, I cut you off. You were saying.
no, and it just that like that it is so satisfying. The culmination, like sonically, visually, performance wise, there's like stoicism and like, it's what Les Miserables wanted to be like when they
Yeah.
when like everybody goes to the barricade, because it's just a little more staid and a little more weird and like I don't know, a little more deserving. I don't know, but it's spectacular.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think like to say a little bit more about the score, which I'm so obsessed with.
Please.
I think like some of the scenes that take place in the kitchen, he brilliantly, I mean, I don't know who was mixing the movie, but I'm sure he worked very closely with Nyman, like in figuring out how he was going to incorporate. I'd be so curious to know if the music was written before the film was shot, because there's like, probably wasn't, but there's all these interesting scenes in the kitchen when like the chopping of the vegetables is like sonically in time with Nyman's score. And like, even like the consomme that's like being boiled is like the bubbles.
It's bubbling in time. Yeah.
It's bubbling in time. And like the knife sharpening too. Like it's gorgeous. It's like, you really know you're in the hands of a master when you're like seeing all of that come together and you're like, wait, how, like, did you plan this? Like how did you plan it?
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to tell you about the latest Shiny Things newsletter, my twice-weekly dispatch about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming thing. Last week, I made my picks for the best films of 2022 and celebrated the Blu-ray release of the delightful Star Trek Prodigy. And this week, I'll be tackling Dwayne Johnson's Black Adam, among other things. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Twitter account. Look, if I don't write about movies, I'll probably die. Could you live with that? I obviously can't. I didn't know this until I looked up Wikipedia, like I always do. But apparently there's a composition of Nyman's from 1985 that's used in the score. So it is possible. It's called Memoria. And I'm not familiar with it, but now I kind of want to double check. But it could have certainly been like played on set, or at least an agreed upon rhythm. And they'd worked together for almost a decade at that point anyway.
Yeah,
so
they were big buds.
Yeah.
I wonder about that. Cause like as a filmmaker, I'm starting to think about that a little more, because I always bring my speaker to set, because a lot of the time I'll be like, just like a loser in the morning to the cast, will be like, I was falling asleep last night and I was thinking about this song and it really, really means something to this character in this moment. So I'm going to play it for you and then we'll go into the scene. Okay. But it would be so cool, even just for like the rhythm and the tempo of performance, and like, even like how the cinematographer is like capturing the scene, to know sort of what the rhythm and the tempo inevitably were maybe going to sort of be like, is really intriguing to me. So I would love in the future to experiment with like knowing exactly what music I'm going to use and see how much that could inform like actual filmmaking on the day, on the set. So it's like, I've never been able to do that before. So
yeah. I mean, Greenaway would probably just bring in a string quartet and have them play for the room.
He probably would. There was definitely like, there's no doubt about it, that there was like, like at least a cello and a couple of violins like hiding somewhere in the like bakery section of the set.
There is something to his movies where every choice is deliberate. Every angle is so clearly, bespoke. To build this entire world. There's maybe 2 exteriors in the entire picture outside the restaurant. And even those might be a soundstage.
Everything was shot on the soundstage, because the only exterior that you get is in the parking lot. Oh no, there's a couple of street scenes too, but I'm sure those were studio as well. Cause it
feels like it. Yeah.
It totally really the only street scene is when the scullery boy is like is going back to the restaurant, and then they catch him and stuff buttons down his throat and send him to the hospital.
As you do.
As you do in a Greenaway film. But yeah, I think it was all shot at whatever the like Pinewood Studios or whatever those used to be called prior to that. But yeah, it is. I think, okay, so one other thing that I want to talk about in it is, and you talked about it earlier, which is the casting of Helen Mirren and oh my God, who plays Michael? Alan Howard. And it's like, they're kind of the least sexy people of all time.
Yeah. And Helen Mirren in 1989 was not the least sexy person in any room.
Not the least sexy. Not, definitely, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But it's like, now that would never happen. Like this movie, unless like to be like publicly funded. Like I don't know what the budget was on the film, but to have this man be the romantic lead of this film, who is like balding, like, you know, really just an average looking guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like it would just never happen. Like now you would have like Oscar Isaac in the role or whatever. And it makes me love the movie so much more because it's like, it's so unusual. And I think the casting too, to me, like it helps, not helps, but is consistent with Greenaway's, I think, inclination to present elegance that is never warm, present elegance that is never quote unquote traditionally sexy or something that you want to eat. Like there's nothing on screen in this film that you want to eat, that you like want to like dream about. Like it's all a little bit grotesque. And I think the casting of that was like, it's perfect.
Well, he's less interested in people as aesthetic objects, right? Like it's they're an element in his frame. But even in Drowning by Numbers, even the Draftsman's Contract maybe is a little more straightforwardly sexy.
Yeah,
and I think it's because
do you like the Draftsman's Contract? I'm so curious.
I like it. I don't love it. I find it feels like a conflict between what he wants to do and what everybody else thinks he should do.
I totally agree. Agree. He's like, okay, yes, sure, I'll make it sexy.
Yeah, it's like, fine, we'll light this properly. But
yes.
But you know, that's the thing about Cook the Thief, is that everything is so gorgeous except the people who are allowed to have, you know, flesh. They're not like they're by no means unhealthy looking people. No. But they're just lit naturally, as opposed to, you know, there's no key light on somebody's chest or shadows on a jawline to make it a little sharper, a little tighter. Nobody is, and I think it's because subtly, this is, I've never seen this played out or proven anywhere. This is my own theory, but I think it's because we're just sort of being told to interpret them as meat. Like,
oh, interesting.
As just, you know, treat them the same way as the hogs that are being butchered, or just see them as bodies.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, that is like, I've often wondered like what he was going for with, like, you know, in the beginning, the two trucks come to like to the restaurant. There's like a truck of meat and a truck of seafood. And then, Alan and Helen Mirren end up like being, they have to escape. And
they're hidden in the frozen trucks
of rotting meat. And it's like what was Greenaway trying to say with that? Like, I mean, you know, once there's sort of like the devolution of like the finery of this restaurant, and like simultaneously, like outside there are like these trucks of like, there's this, you know, truck of rotting seafood and this truck of rotting meat. And it's like, basically like the kingdom is falling apart, and like it's rotten from the inside. And like, you know, it's something is rotten in the state of Denmark.
Right.
But it's like, I always wondered, I was like, because there's this weird aspect of it too, when Michael and Georgina, they're naked for like 20 minutes in the film and they can't get their clothes back. And like, the chef, the cook, Richard, oh my God, what's his name? Richard Bohringer, yeah, is like, yes, I will get your clothes, but like, you have to go now. And then they're just naked for like 20 minutes. And I was like, okay, Greenaway, I know you're like a bit of a, you know, religiosophile, like a bit of a Catholic stand. So it's like, are we doing a weird Adam and Eve thing here?
Oh, I think very much so, yeah.
I think so. But it's like, but then you put them in this truck of rotting meat. And I was like, not 100% sure with what you're going for there, but evocative imagery. Like, well done, sir. Very interesting.
Yeah. It struck me as the kind of thing where like he's trying to show us how much suffering they're willing to endure to be together.
Ah, interesting.
So there's an Adam and Eve thing there, but there's also just a vulnerability of the flesh. Like they're just, this is punishment for something. And that's like, that's my 7 Deadly Sins theory too, where he's just constantly showing us what gluttony looks like. And even if it's lust, even if it's, you know, like a lust for the flesh of another person, to bury yourself in them, which is sort of a reading here where they're surrounded by additional flesh, but it's just horrible. I don't even know where, I'm not sure where I'm going with that exactly, but it feels like a culmination of all of the ugliness, of all of the messiness of the world that he's built. Like,
I want to believe too that, I mean, in the kitchen scenes, they're so interesting because throughout Greenaway's work, like spirituality and particularly Catholicism is very present. And in the kitchen scenes, it's very clear that there is a kind of religiosity to it. Like some of the sous chefs are sort of dressed like nuns, and there's like a reverence for the food that is taken that is sort of holy. And I mean, even like the character of the cook is very kind of priestly in a way. Like Helen Mirren tries to like get him to like, have sex with her later. And he's like, he resists, but he's very chaste in a lot of ways. And I think like everybody in the kitchen, and even like the scullery boy, who, another fantastic performance. Like, who is that kid? Yeah. Where did he go? But he's singing these like gorgeous like choir boy hymns as he like washes dishes. And like it's the church of fine cuisine, of haute cuisine for Greenaway. But I also think that in some ways, I want to believe that what Greenaway was kind of like on about in those associations was like, these people are vanguards of good taste, and like they are the keepers and the watchers and the knights who protect what is of value because it is of good taste. And I think that there's something like I love to believe that like Peter is enough of an optimist. Even though he's not, this man is a raging nihilist. Yeah.
No, we all rot. I think that is kind of his deal.
Yeah, we all rot. That's kind of his thing. But I think that there's like, I like to believe that there's something in those associations that he believes that, there is value in preserving, in the preservation of good taste. And I think that that's kind of like exemplified in those kitchen scenes, and beautifully done.
Well, and that's the other thing too, because Richard is doing all of this for a man he neither respects nor admires, who treats his food like fuel, like garbage. It's all corrupted. Like all this beautiful work is for nothing. I think about the stop motion decay in Zed and Two Knots, where we're shown in horrific, unrelenting detail, just bodies of animals collapsing into nothing.
Yes.
And still, I have issues with that. I mean, it's as grand a statement as any filmmaker could ever make about anything. And Cronenberg was inspired to make Dead Ringers as a result of the visuals of it. And it's a magnificent accomplishment, but like, where do you go from there? And that's the answer, right? You go here, you find something truly beautiful, and you watch it come apart in slow motion in exactly the same way, except that it's the souls of the people trapped inside the film.
Yeah. It's so funny too, like at the end, like when Mirren in that insane costume, which is probably Gautier's masterpiece for like the entire film, when she comes in this like BDSM like leather cage dress, and she has this like woman who's like following her around, like moving the cage behind her. And it's like all of a sudden, it's like it's the apotheosis. It is like the emerging of the butterfly. It's like it is Helen Mirren who has like finally come into her own and is like totally self-possessed. And there is like something about her in that scene, and the rest of the sort of like kitchen staff who come and are kind of like doing their moment of like Viva la Revolution. That is like, in that moment we get to see, I think, I don't know, there's like, it might be Greenaway's best film because it's like, I feel like it's the closest he comes in his entire canon to optimism. Cause like he's a raging cynic and like, he's obsessed with irony. It's like, he can't have a frame or a phrase that's not like just laced with a titch of irony. But I think in this one, it's like, that's probably it's one of the most earnest scenes that Greenaway has, I think, in like all of his films. It's like Mirren telling a man that she hates to eat her dead lover that he killed. And it's like, yeah, there's an earnestness to it that I really appreciate. And I think like Greenaway, I think he is both fascinated by melodrama and actually quite drawn to it, but also totally repulsed by it. So it's like he has to put it in his films, but he also like has to comment on the fact that like, here's some melodrama and like, what a joke. And as a filmmaker, I totally sympathize with that because if left to my own devices without, somebody else telling me like, do you think that's maybe a little cheesy? I would make something terrible and cheesy. And so I think you're right. It might be his best film.
But it's the one time one of his films offers a moral ending. Like that actually is, people have died, people have suffered, an innocent, I suppose if you go by the sinning thing, then the transgression is already committed where you've committed adultery, but the bad man is held accountable. And I think it's the only time in any of his movies where there is some sort of scale balance thing happening. Because Drowning by Numbers ends with such an empty,
ambiguity.
Sad, nothingness, right?
Yeah.
And I think watching it this last time, I realized it's the first time the camera tilts down at Spica when he's eating, when he's there holding his knife and fork, and he's made smaller, right? Like, he's not only isolated, but he's smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And it connects to that childishness thing. And, this is the first time he's been forced to experience consequence.
Yes.
And it's almost too good that he gets killed. Like he should have to finish.
It's almost too good. I know he takes one bite. One bite and it's not even the dick, which Helen Mirren is like, try the cock, Albert.
Yes, it's a delicacy, right?
You know where it's been.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's delicacy.
It's
and
horrible.
then he takes some ab of Michael and you're like, I don't know. You're like, Spica should have to eat that whole thing. And what is the final line of the movie? She shoots him and she says,
"Oh, cannibal." Yeah.
Cannibal.
Dismissively. Like that's the thing that bothers her the most, which is wonderful. And that's Peter Greenaway's sense of humor. You go out on a laugh line, even though you've just experienced 2 hours of this grinder.
Yeah. Of a violin bow, just like sawing into your brain.
Yeah. But it's so pleasurable. It is. Like, I get it. I understand why this was his popular breakthrough, like why it was a hit. And part of that, we kind of have to deal with the Weinstein of it all, right? Like this is Harvey Weinstein buying it and making sure everybody knew that it was the big, sexy cannibal picture, which it kind of really isn't. But I do love the idea of Miramax's then reputable machinery, and this is before the Disney purchase, just going all out to make sure people knew what this movie was. Even though releasing it unrated, which of course was the only way to release it in the States, guaranteed that audiences wouldn't get to see it because it would only play a certain number of theaters. But without, like, that's the worst thing about the legacy of Harvey Weinstein, other than all the really horrible shit, which I don't want to, his crimes against art are nothing against his crimes against people.
Yes.
But
kind of weird that like Albert Spica kind of is Harvey Weinstein.
I was kind of about to go there.
Whoa, parallels.
Yeah, just a vulgarian who doesn't appreciate anything that he's touching, but is actually paying for it all. It's so strange that film, because it isn't like Miramax wasn't Miramax when Greenaway made it. None of this is a logical through line. It just feels so much like a snapshot 30 odd years later of the thing that was about to happen. It is absolutely fascinating. It's also the reason, we were talking about this before we started recording, it's also the reason there's no Blu-ray, because by the time Blu-ray happened, Miramax was owned by Disney and Disney wouldn't touch this thing.
Really interesting. Okay, but like I'm kind of confused because now like Disney's like putting out Salo like on streaming, like on Disney Plus, and I'm like, what?
Salo? Did I miss that?
I like maybe I needed to like read a tweet. No, somebody like I'm pretty sure this is verified. Like they're releasing Salo on Disney Plus.
I am distressed by this.
I
thought it was on Criterion.
It's definitely on Criterion, but okay, we're gonna have to do some like Googling after this.
I don't know how
several of my friends sent me, maybe I should have read the article
probably
with
an
a
Onion
little
thing.
more. Yeah, maybe it's an Onion thing. I don't know, but several of my friends were like, yes, Salo's coming out on Disney. And I was like, what?
No.
I was like, no.
Like the
no,
joke
thank
to me
you.
would be Hulu commissioning an 8-part new adaptation of Salo. From, I don't know, the guys who made 500 Days of Summer.
Yeah, they would probably do a bang-up job with
500 Days of Salo, it's right there.
Yeah, perfect. I can't wait to watch that 8-part miniseries. It's going to be great.
I can wait.
Maybe Mike White could like come in as a consultant and like really and really make it pop.
He's kind of doing that already.
He kind of is. 500 Days of Salo.
500 Days of Salo. What would the musical number in the middle be? I don't want to know. I don't want to think about it.
Yeah, no.
Chapel of Love, probably. Oh, God. How do we get back to anything reasonable? The podcast always wraps up with the same question, which is, is there anything of Cook the Thief in the movies you've made in your work? And I don't see a lot of Greenaway in adult adoption. I do see a certain love for faces, like for textures of people. Yeah. But that's the only thing I can connect to.
Like I feel like there's not there is no Greenaway in adult adoption. Absolutely not. I mean, I think the references for that film when we were sort of like planning that was like very Andrea Arnold heavy, very sort of like, cinema verite, like faces, closeness, roughness, kind of whereas Greenaway is literally the complete opposite. But the very first film that I made, which is called Case of the Massey Bodice Ripping, which was a short that I filmed in like 2017, is heavily influenced by Greenaway. Like it's very compositional, it's very theatrical. There are like long extended wides. It is like it's very like mannered. It's like set in the 1920s. And yes, it was the first film that I made, so it's a little embarrassing, but I also am really proud of it. Like I watched it again kind of recently, and I was like, you know what? I was like, I can really see a lot of like me as a young filmmaker kind of being like, was trying to figure things out a little bit. And I think that was sort of like me taking some elements of his life. Like there's a shot of like a woman in a French maid outfit, like stuffing a raw poultry carcass. And like, I remember shooting that and being like, yes, I was like, this is it. I was like, oh, I'm getting what I want here. And there's like the irony and the kind of like arch performances that you kind of get, like the emotionless but arch performances that I think are hallmark of Greenaway's canon. But yeah, adult adoption, my first feature, has nothing to do with that. And I think that was like, I mean, I didn't write adult adoption. So, I had to service the script. And so it's not necessarily exactly what I would do. And I think it's an interesting kind of like cross-section for a director, I think, when you're directing somebody else's work, because you can't, you don't want to just foist all of your sort of taste on top of somebody else's text. I think you have to take the text and be like, okay, how do I make this text beautiful? And like, what services this text in a good way? Whereas like, I have a screenplay right now that I'm trying to get made that is like the most ridiculous Greenaway-esque kind of shit show that eventually I will get to make. And I can't wait to, shoot on 35 millimeter and light the shit out of it in the most like, old school, gelled, color paletted kind of way.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah, that movie's going to be really cool when I get to make it.
My thanks to Karen Knox, whose feature directorial debut, Adult Adoption, opens in Toronto at the Review Cinema this Saturday, January 14th, and next Friday, January 20th, in London and Vancouver. Karen will be at the review on opening night for a Q&A with friend of the show Emily Gagne. Check out reviewcinema.ca for tickets. Thanks also to Laura Steen. She knows what she did. You can find Karen on Twitter at Knox_X_X_X, or just search her name. And you can find The Cook, the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover streaming on BritBox in the US, but not in Canada. You can find the Anchor Bay DVD knocking around out there, and the UK Blu-ray isn't expensive if you've got a multi-region player. So, once again, let's hear it for physical media. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can. I'll see you next week.